All right. So it looks like we have a few other folks joined. I don't know if you guys saw my note on LinkedIn or the event that was on LinkedIn, but essentially for today, we do not have a guest speaker coming in. Nobody's coming in to talk. This is more of just an open Q&A session. So if anybody has any questions about anything that they wanted to walk through, first come, first serve. So just speak up and we can go through anything that you like. If we didn't have any questions, I actually had one thing that I was going to walk through today that came up this week in the, my day to day. So I'll open it up for questions. Does anybody have anything that they wanted to go through today? Right. So hearing nothing. I am going to share my screen then after I close Twitter here. All right. So the use case then that I had that came out this week was somebody had a requirement where they wanted to prevent users from transferring an account to another user if they weren't in the same role, right? Here, let me stop my share. So just with that basic requirement, how would you stop somebody from changing ownership of an account to a user that was in a different role? Does anybody have any thoughts on how they would do that? Because I'll be honest with you, this came up this morning and I got my booster shot yesterday and I'm about 60% brain working here. So what are your thoughts? Anybody have any suggestions on how you would accomplish that? And then I'll walk you through my kind of squirrely process.
Sounds like a validation rule.
I thought about that. So here, let's kind of explore that because that's the first direction that I was thinking as well, where, if we go into setup and we go to object manager and then account, we could put a validation rule. And then I'm thinking, all right, well, you just need to check the previous role compared to the prior value role to the current role. And then that would give you an idea. But when we look at the conditions, this is where I kind of ended up. If I were to go to, let's see, we should be able to get owner somewhere in here. Let's see, where would owner be? So account owner. Oh, there you go, account owner. And then you would be able to get the role, right? And then the role name. So if we said, all right, so we got the role name, and now we want to compare if it's different than the previous value role name, right? So, first thing I was thinking is, let me, I've got to turn off the waiting room. There you go. All right, so yeah, then I was thinking, all right, then we have this, there's a function here for prior value. So if we get, there it is. So if we throw that in there, so I want to get the prior value of, that owner field or that role name. That's actually not a thing. So we just throw test in there, test, and check syntax. So prior value can't be used on the owner user role .name field. So it prevents us from doing that. It prevents just a basic validation rule based on that owner role. So again, before I jump into mine, any other thoughts on how we can accomplish that? Because validate the basic validation rule, I don't think it's going to cut it in this case.
What if you lock it down on org-wide defaults, then set a permission set or a public group to give access only to that role that should have it?
Interesting. Okay, so essentially, maybe not a permission set, but essentially either a group or a sharing rule or something like that, where people can only see records that are in the role that they're a part of. So they can only see the stuff that they're a part of.
Yes, sir.
I could see how that can get you kind of there, but I don't think that would prevent you from transferring ownership to somebody else. Right? That's not going to prevent you from doing that. So any other thoughts before, like I said, I go into this kind of strange model that I came up with here? All right.
I think I've run into some.
Yeah.
I just remember just studying for Service Cloud, I run into some examples where you're trying to call up a permission set and test if the permissions, can you validation rule a permission set maybe?
Well, remember permission sets. Object? Yeah, permission sets, that's going to grant access to certain objects or fields or permissions.
Yeah.
Not so much around like record access or data access, right?
Okay.
So here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to jump into this. I'll show you what I came up with, and then you can throw tomatoes at it here. But just as to let everybody know what we're looking at here. So a use case came up where we basically wanted to prevent a user from transferring an account to somebody else that was in a different role. So the only account transfers that were allowed were within the same role. So I was able to Well, I wasn't able to put this together, but I'll show you what we'll actually build this out from scratch here. So here's my thoughts, right? Somehow we need to throw a validation when they try to save the record. When they try to make a change, it needs to throw a validation error, right? So where I'm going to start, I'm going to go to fields on the account, and I'm going to create a new field here. And I'm going to call this, let's just make this a text field. And I'm going to call it something like, okay, where are the home keys? Here we go. So validation issue, something generic like that. I'll make it 255. We'll make it the full text, right? So that's just a basic field that we create a text field. Now, we'll give this to everybody right here. And then, what is this? Oh, this is a page layout. Yeah, we'll add it to the page layout just so we can use it for testing. All right, so now we have a basic field. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the validation rules for the account, and I'm going to create a validation rule on that text field. So we're going to say validation issue ownership. Here, let's go back into the waiting room. Anybody want to volunteer to manage the waiting room? Let's see.
I'll do it, Bill.
Thanks, Kyle. I'm going to promote you. Giving you a promotion here.
Sweet.
There you go. With great power comes great responsibility. Don't forget that. All right. All right. So here we go. So I have a, and I'm going to get rid of this because it looks weird. But we're going to call this the validation issue. And instead of ownership, I'm going to call this like role change or something like that. All right. And then the condition that we're going to put here, the condition that when it's true is going to actually throw the error. We're going to make that where we have this validation issue field is equal to, make it something like invalid role change. All right. And there we go. So invalid role change. So when that field is equal to invalid role change, we're going to throw an error message like you can't transfer ownership. Oh my God, owner. Okay, let's try that again. Ownership to a user outside of your role. All right. And we'll put that at the top of the page. Okay. So right now, all we have is a custom field, a text-based field, and we have a validation rule that when that field is equal to invalid role change, it's going to throw a validation error. Now we have to figure out, well, how are we actually going to set that validation text field to invalid role change? And what I came up with, and I'm going to copy this just so that I can get that text right. What I came up with was basically a flow, right? So I'm going to go over to flows, and let's see here. I'm going to create a new flow, and we're going to call this will be a record triggered flow. So we want this to fire whenever a record is changed, specifically an account record. We'll go freeform, old school. And then here we go. So we're going to say when an account record is created or updated, and it probably could just be updated because you would never do an ownership change when a record's created. So let's just go with when it's updated. And then for now, we're not going to put any conditions, and we're going to say fast field updates. Now, this says fast field updates, and this says actions and related records. But in my mind, coming from a development background, that means a before trigger, and that's an after trigger, right? And if you look at the order of execution, when you save a record, the before triggers happen, then it checks the validation rules, and then it fires the after triggers. So if we're going to do something to prevent this record from actually being saved, we have to do it in the before context. So I'm going to go right here on that fast field updates /before. All right, so there we go. So we have the beginnings of our flow. Now we're going to put our decision in here, right? So I'm going to say, was the ownership changed to a new role? Question mark. Okay. And I think I grabbed the wrong thing, didn't I? Here, let's grab the decision block, and I should have copied that. So was the ownership changed to a new role? Question. We're going to say, yes, it was. And how are we going to know that it was, right? So we're going to look at, now, this is the key thing. We can actually look at what was the previous values and what are the new values by these two special variables that we have here. The $sign record is what it is after the save is going to change, or after the save action commits. And then you have the record prior, which is what that record looked like before you made any changes to it, right? So basically, to keep this simple, and we'll test this to see if it works, but essentially we can say, okay, if the record prior dot, and there should be a owner user role name is not equal to the record, so the new value, owner, role, name. Okay. So that's how we're going to know if the ownership was changed to a new role. The prior value role name is different than the current value role name. All right. So I'm going to click save there. Now, what are we going to do with that? So if we detect a record change, what we're going to do is we're going to have an assignment block here. We're going to say, throw validation error, and we're going to set the record validation issue field equal to. And if you didn't know this, Windows V gives you your clipboard, a history of your clipboard, so you can throw that in there. So we're going to set that equal to that invalid role change and set that as done. And we're going to go that route if we detected that a change was made. If no change was made, we want to make sure that we blank out that field, right? So we want to, nullify it so that the validation won't fire. So I'm going to copy this thing, put it over here, and then we'll go in here and make some changes. And we'll say clear all errors. Okay. And in that case, we're going to set that validation issue to an empty string. All right, we're going to set that as done. So we'll connect it this way. All right. So to kind of review, we create a text field, just a standard text field 255 called validation issue. We created a validation rule on that field so that when it's set to that, that text that we have here, if it gets set to invalid role change, it's going to fire a validation error. And then what we do, we have a record triggered flow that's going to run in the before context or the fast field updates context. And if it detects that the role has changed from the current user to the new user, it's going to throw that error. So it's going to go this path. Yes, it was changed. And we're going to set that text field equal to this, text that we have, which should in turn fire the validation rule. Now, that's all in theory. So I'm going to save this and we'll give this a quick test here and we'll see if this works. But while I'm saving this, any questions about what we just put together? We'll call this custom field or flow-based validation rule thing, whatever. All right. All right. So save. All right. So I'm going to activate this. And in theory now, if I go to my users, let's go back to our users. So right now, I'm logged in as the the standard user or my user here in Cunning Impala, and I am part of the SVP Human Resources role. And then I created Test McTester, who is in a VP of International Sales. Now, in theory, if I try to change the ownership to Test McTester, we should get that validation rule error. And this is kind of the moment of truth, right? So let's see what happens here. So I'm going to go here. We're going to change this to Test McTester. And I'm going to click save. And there you go. You can't transfer ownership to a user outside of your role. Now, to do the negative test or the make sure it actually works, what I'm going to do here is first, let's just say cancel. We'll go back to our users. And I'm going to change Test McTester to Senior Vice President of Human Resources as their role. And because now we're in the same role, it should allow me to make that change. All right. So if we go back here, I'm going to do that. Test McTester, save. And there you go. So, kind of a convoluted process, but, essentially this allows us to get around the limitations of a validation rule where you can't check the prior value of the owner user role name field. So we create a text field, create a validation rule in that text field, and then basically do the logic part of it in our flow and either set that, that text field to the error condition or we clear it out. Now, cool thing about this is that let's just say you have a couple different use cases like this where you want to, check other things. So it's the, changing the ownership and the roles. It might be, the person's last name has more than 8 characters, whatever it is. So whatever the use cases that you want to validate and throw errors on, you could basically take that flow and just add a couple other, decisions. So just to kind of show you that, if I share my screen. So in our flow, this decision block, this is the key one right here. What we could do is we're checking here that was the ownership changed to a new role, but maybe what we do is we make that more generic and we just say like, check all validations. And then we're going to say here, we'll change this one to something more specific, like invalid role change, right? And then we might have another one here that we check that is, I don't know, the location is X, And, you can't do something. So basically put criteria for location as X. And then what would happen is we would have another path then. So instead of just going to throw the validation error for that role change, you can have a bunch of other ones where we're throwing different validation messages. So, different text combinations that are tied to those different validation rules. So let me pause there and see if anybody has any questions. Does that make sense as far as how to get around that?
Can I just, it's amazing. It's very, very good. I do see also the scenario in where you can make a certain user or role eligible into changing ownership or not. And I believe that would fit into your flow, meaning that, for example, you can put a checkbox, and if that checkbox or maybe like a pick list value is set under a certain value, then and only then that user is then eligible in changing the ownership of the account, which might be an extra layer of security into granting these access to certain roles or certain users.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that comes up a lot when we talk about validation rules, in that a lot of times you're going to put some kind of exception criteria, right? So, block this transaction unless the person's in the sysadmin profile, or unless they have some kind of checkbox set to true, that kind of stuff. So this would allow you to do that as well. To your point, in that first decision block, we can check, did the role change? Is the person not in the sysadmin profile? And we can actually get pretty complex with that too. So, we're talking about, everything in the context of that one account and the owner and then the new owner. But we can even get other records. We can query other tables and check to see if other, records exist in the database. And if they do, then let it go forward. But if they don't, stop it. So there's a lot of logic that you can build into that in Flow that you would never be able to do within a validation.
Amazing. That's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other thoughts or any other questions, concerns on that?
Hey, Bill. I know there are typically multiple ways of getting these things done.
Yeah.
Can you think of any other ways of getting that done besides through Flow?
Yeah, that's what we were kind of brainstorming at the very beginning. We talked about just a straight up validation rule where we check the owner and the prior value of the owner. That doesn't work. We talked about, sharing rules or, different kinds of permissions and things like that. I can't think of a way there. Flow is definitely a way. The only other way that I could think of, that might be a little bit overkill, but it would work, would be a trigger, right? So we can do an account, before insert or before update trigger that checks to see if the owner has changed, does all the logic. And then if it fails the validation, then we can just throw the error directly. In that case, if we did the trigger method, we wouldn't actually create a validation rule. We wouldn't need a text field or any of that kind of stuff. It would just be, record.add error. And then you could say you're not allowed to do that. So between the flow and this text field and validation rule or a trigger, I couldn't think of any other way to do it. So like I said, I'm open to other suggestions because like I said, I'm feeling about 60% today. So there could be something obvious that I'm missing here.
I'm pretty impressed that you were able to accomplish that without going to a trigger. So I think it's just a matter of getting creative.
Yeah, and I don't want to start a sharks and the jets things here with triggers and flow, but I'm pretty sure that pretty much everything that you can do these days with a trigger you can accomplish now with a flow. As far as basic use cases like this, of course, we're not going to get into batch Apex and everything else, but yeah, I think flows are a good way to go. So, all right. So, any other questions on this use case? Otherwise, we can open it up to other questions. I'll just throw it out there. Dan, you look pretty sharp today. Nice. I'm wearing my I'm feeling sick sweatshirt.
Yeah, we have to make a video today for hiring our heroes, and nice. I'm dressed to impress for the video, but that's not my normal MO for sure.
Yeah, and then you look on LinkedIn for the 2 videos that I've recorded in the past week, and I'm wearing a t-shirt like some kind of schlub. So yeah. I'll look up to you, try to do the right thing next time. All right, cool. Well, let's open it up then for questions. Does anybody have anything else that they want to go through, or any other use cases?
Hey, Bill, Andrew here. How
Andrew.
Are you, sir?
I'm doing well.
Hey, sorry, I was at another meeting, so I was about 15 minutes late. I know. So we're talking about the process builder. Is that what you were talking about?
No. So basically, we were talking about just to get it out there, right? So process builder, workflow rules. They're kind of old school. we're going with flows these days, right? Because
flows. Okay, right.
Yeah, yeah. So we're talking about flows.
Yes.
And the use case that we were trying to address is how would you throw a validation rule error on the account ownership change from one user's role to a different role? We want to prevent them from transferring ownership outside of their role. So that's what we did. We had a text field, validation rule based on the text field, and then a flow that basically, sets the error condition or not based on some kind of criteria.
Right. Okay, understood. All right, thank you.
Very cool. All right, I'm going to stop talking for a minute, catch my breath. Any other questions that you guys have that you want to walk through, or any other use cases? Let's see.
So I just did one, Bill. You helped me probably 2 months ago or so with a flow and how to do one. You recorded it, but I don't know how to go back into your old ones and find where that's at, because I got busy and I didn't get to it, and then I can't remember when it is, but I want to be able to go back and get that and watch it. Yeah, so you would, here's the link. I'll put this in the chat for everybody. And honestly, I'm more of a tech guy than like a personal branding marketing guy, which I need to sit in more of David Nevada sessions on Wednesdays. But this is the actual playlist that we have on YouTube of all of our past sessions. So you should be able to go there and see everything. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. What else? Any other kind of technical questions that we can go through? Questions, trailhead badges, certification issues, anything? Has anybody joined the call that's a part of the Salesforce YouTube channel? That was the other question that came up in the beginning. If you get a content strike from Salesforce about a video you uploaded, who would you reach out to try to get it removed?
The reason that's so important is, and I guess my biggest concern now isn't so much being able to reach out to the Salesforce team, but the individual that issued the strike. Apparently, I cannot even have an audience with that individual because nobody even knows who from Salesforce issued that strike. So is it a channel member? Is it somebody that was just watching the channel that put the content in? It could actually pose a greater question for the Salesforce community than just simply having the copyright strike, the more I think about it.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like I said, I'll look to see if I can find that that Twitter channel that I've had success with in the past, and I'll let you know.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, again, any other questions or any other topics that you guys wanted to discuss?
Hey, Bill. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no. Go ahead. I can be second.
Oh, no. Please. I always have a lot of questions. So I've learned to give other people an opportunity to talk. So please.
I was gonna say, okay. Pearl, I heard you're first.
So. Sure. I try to keep it short. So I'm actually studying App Builder, right? So I'm on the deployment section. So what I would like to, I don't know whether it's good because it's not that a big of a topic. It's about change set. So if you don't mind, Bill, I'd like to see how you can come up with a example, creating a change set and deploy it. That would really totally help me to like visualize how this thing's going. Then I can just move on. Yeah.
So yeah, I can definitely kind of walk through an example there. Maybe a basic example, and then if you want to sync up offline, we can do that. But what I'm going to do, I'm in my Trailhead playground. That's where I was doing one of that flow. So I'm actually going to jump into my production org, and I'm going to hide all my secret squirrel stuff here, so you guys don't see that. And I'm going to share my screen, and we'll kind of walk through this. So essentially, if everybody's not aware, chainsets are a way that you can deploy metadata, changes, fields, flows, all that kind of stuff from one environment to another. So if you just go here, there's three things in setup that you should be aware of, right? So if we just type in change, you'll see the inbound chain set, meaning the ones that are being deployed to this org. We can see outbound chain sets, which are, we create them here and then we package them up to deploy somewhere else. And then of course, one of the most important things here
we're going to go ahead and get started here. So looking at our use case that we're going to address today.
Did you get somebody watching the video? There we go. All right, so yeah, it's deployment changes. So if we look in, if we type in deployment, you'll see deployment status. So if we were actually deploying a chain set, you would see the status of that here and, see how it's going, right? So when it comes to creating a chain set, typically you're not going to be doing this from production to some other environment. You might, there could be a use case for that, but mostly it's going to be from a sandbox to your production environment. So just for testing purposes here, I'm going to go to outbound chain sets, and we'll create one real quick, right? So first thing that we can do is click new. We'll give it a general name like, whatever, RH changes. RH is my resource hero company, so we'll just call it that. And then on this screen, this is where you actually get to select what is the thing that you're trying to deploy. What are you trying to move from this environment to another environment? So in this middle section here, this is where it actually allows you to add those things, right? So for example, if I click add, it'll take me to this. It'll ask me what type of thing am I trying to add? So let's just say we're trying to deploy a new field that we created. So I'll go to custom field, and let's just say that we're trying to deploy, there you go, these two fields, package ID and package version ID, right? So I can just select those two fields here, and I can add that to a chain set. In addition to that, if you want to add other things like other metadata types, pretty much everything that's in Salesforce, more or less, is going to be here. So you can deploy Apex classes, flows you've built, all kinds of stuff. So you can kind of go through that list. But let's just say that we're trying to deploy this flow in two fields. Okay, so let's select that flow, select those two fields, click that add to chain set, and now you can see that they're listed here. What's actually in this chain set. Now, one of the really cool things is you see they have this button here for view add dependencies, right? So if, for example, we added a flow, and on that flow, there's a whole bunch of other fields that are referenced. We want to make sure that they exist in the destination environment. We can click on that view add dependencies, and it'll take us to a list of all the other things that might be required for us to deploy this. So from here, I'm just going to check those, the ones that can be checked. These are managed packages, so you can't, force those, but we'll check the ones that we can, and click add to chain set. And there you go. Now, the other key thing, besides just adding in the fields and flows and everything else, you can actually package up permissions for those things. Now, the really cool thing about this is if I were to go in here and do add profiles, I can select, let's just say resource hero standard and system administrator. What this is going to do, it's not going to grab all the permissions that those profiles have access to, or, all the, system permissions and field level security. It's not going to grab everything for those profiles. All it's going to do is grab the permissions for these things that you have here that you've added to the chain set, and just make sure that they follow, the chain set. So if I deployed this to Sandbox, it would make sure that the sysadmin profile and the resource hero standard profile have the appropriate permissions for these, things that we're deploying. All right. The final thing then is, once you would build this out and you actually have your chain set, then you can actually upload. And I think this is where we're going to run into an issue. So if I were to click upload here, it's going to ask you, where do you want to upload it to? In other words, what is that destination environment? And right now, because I'm in production, I actually don't have any destination environments configured. So to do that, to actually tell where you're allowed to deploy this, you would actually go in here to, I know it's something like deployment settings, right? And this is basically a list of all of your environments. And if you wanted to allow, an environment or production deploy to this Sandbox, for example, I can click edit here, and I can say, allow inbound changes, and I guess you have to do this from the other environment. But basically, you have to enable that environment before you're allowed to upload this package to it and potentially deploy it. All right. So let me just pause there. Does that make sense as far as chain sets, what they're used for, how you connect to other environments, all that stuff?
Totally. That's exactly what I need to see. To back up where you stop about enabling another environment like a sandbox, right?
Yeah.
So as long as I have the sandbox link to the production environment, is that what you mean by using the word enable?
Yeah. So in a realistic use case, we would be deploying from one of these sandboxes to production. Yep. Now, right now I'm in production, so it doesn't make a lot of sense. But basically, if you were working and you were building this chain set in the ComShare sandbox, what you would do is you would come into production, you would click edit next to that, and you would check this box for allow inbound changes, right? So once you would check that, when you go into your sandbox and you go into your chain set, here, let me go back into that outbound. So if you were in your sandbox and you opened up your outbound chain set and you would hit upload. After you've set that value in production, allowing inbound chain sets, you would see production here and you'd be able to check that and then click upload.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So Bill, on that, if you had an app that you have in your sandbox, you've tested and proved that the app will do what you need it to do, would you actually do a chain set to move it back into production, or just go to production org and download the app that you know now works for what you needed to do?
You're talking about like an app from the App Exchange?
Yes.
Yeah. So App Exchange apps, you're not going to be able to deploy that via chain set. You're going to have to install that just like you installed it in the sandbox. You would do the same thing for production, either directly with a link or, through the App Exchange itself. That being said, if you've built any fields on top of that, those you might want to deploy via chain set. So a perfect example of this is, we have customers that they'll install Resource Hero in a sandbox. They'll create all kinds of automation and other fields and things that they, that to meet their use case. Once they validated that everything works, we think about like that deployment plan, which is in production, we have to install Resource Hero first. And then we take that chain set with all the different fields and things we've added in the sandbox, and then we deploy that on top. But if you tried to deploy that chain set without first installing in production, it would fail. There would be prerequisites that it couldn't find.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. And there may be, there's certain things that you can't deploy with a chain set, like, custom setting values and things like that you have to be aware of. But generally speaking, if it's not a managed package, you can deploy it via chain set.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
That I ran into some errors where I had a report, like a custom report, and then custom fields. I put them both in the chain set, but I got errors saying that it didn't find the field. So then I gave up. So I kind of just did a change set for the fields and then a change set for the reports, and it worked. So is it sometimes like that where you have to do two different change sets?
It shouldn't, right? Okay. So if you had a new report that contained, 4 new custom fields, if you put those 4 custom fields and the report in the same chain set, that deployment should be successful. Where it might fail, there's a couple of reasons, I guess. If you accidentally missed one of the fields that was dependent, the report was dependent on. If your report was based on a custom report type, maybe that had to be created first, so that wasn't part of the chain set. I could see that failing. But yeah, generally speaking, that should work perfectly fine. And that's where that show dependencies kind of comes in handy, because if you click on this and you had a report that was dependent on certain fields, those fields, if you didn't add them manually, they should show up on this dependency list here. So that could always be a check too.
Okay, perfect. And so maybe you're right. Maybe I was missing a field and then I had to go back. But would you recommend, if you had like a process builder, a flow, and then reports and custom fields, would you recommend them all in one chain set or different chain sets?
It really depends on a few factors, right? If it was me responsible for all 3 of those things and it was just a massive deployment that we were doing, like we need to deploy everything at once, it's part of like a rollout, I would probably put them on the same chain set. If there was going to be, maybe a gap between deploying certain pieces of functionality, where you wanted to be able to deploy, functionality set 1 with fields and flows, and then maybe functionality set 2 is going to come a few days later with, updated reports and everything else you're working on. I could see putting that into a separate chain set. I think there's definitely a benefit of having them together in the same one. And, depending on what you're deploying, like if you're deploying code, having them in one would definitely give you some performance enhancements as well, because whenever you deploy code in production, it has to run through all the tests. So, like Apex tests. So if you had that in 3 chain sets, you're gonna have to run through those, 3 different times. And depending on how many you have, that might, you might be sitting there looking at it forever. But yeah, I think it really depends on the use case. Generally speaking, if I was just deploying everything from something I built in Sandbox to production, I'd put them all in one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Bill.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, this is my first time, joining the military office hours. I wanted to know that, not to obviously go out of topic, but is there usually something you talk every week particularly, or is it just students come and just ask you a bunch of questions, or how does that work usually?
Yeah, great question, Andrew. So we have a couple different kind of flavors of military trailblazer office hours, right? So the open Q&A, that's what we have here today. So, if there's any use cases that I've seen, throughout my work week that I've found interesting that other might learn from, I might present those. If folks have questions like we're going through right now, happy to walk through any of those questions. So, no agenda, just answering any kind of questions that come up. The other kind of flavor would be when we invite speakers to come. So, for example, last week we had Cheryl Feldman, one of the PMs from Salesforce, come give a presentation on, the AuthZX roadmap that she and her team are working on. We might have MVPs come and do a presentation about formulas and formula fields and things like that. So I try to mix it up so we don't have. I'm trying to make it so that we don't have too many speakers, back to back, because people do have questions, and that was kind of the original intent of this call. So the goal for 2022 is every other week would be open Q&A, and then the alternate would be some kind of speaker presenting a topic.
Okay. And this is the office hours is the same thing with also the event that happens on Wednesday, right? Like this Wednesday there was career branding. I mean, it's
great. Great question.
Part of the same.
Yeah. So David Nava, he hosts a Wednesday call, and his focus is more on career branding, certifications, transitioning military into the Salesforce ecosystem, that type of stuff. Whereas we try to keep the calls on Friday to more technical focused, focused
more
on
technical
technology,
stuff.
learning, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Understood. Okay. Sorry for the silliness. This is my first time.
Great question.
I just wanted to kind of get acclimated, so yeah.
Yeah. Great question.
Thanks.
And as far as, I'll just throw it out there since the question was asked. But as far as speakers are concerned, if anybody on the call wants to present something, you are more than welcome to shoot me an email, which I will put into the chat right now. And we can schedule you. So anything you ran into at work, interesting use case, you're passionate about Pardot or something, feel free to let me know and we can schedule you.
Hey, Bill, we got a couple of questions. Looks like Emmanuel and Chloe.
Yeah, Chloe, you have your hand up, so I'm going to go with you first.
Okay, thanks. Okay, random use case, and if it's too weird or impossible, just let me know.
Yeah.
If I have a detail object, custom object, that when it's created, I want it to prompt several different people to go to it and do something, like review it or whatever it is. I'm having issues since you can't create a queue for a detail custom object or an approval process.
Okay.
I'm just having trouble figuring out how I should get it to prompt all those people to come do what they need to do.
Yeah. So how they say holding a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So I've been on a kick this past week of looking at Flow Orchestrator. Are you familiar with that?
I'm pretty new. So
yeah, so that might be one option. The only downside of this is that I think it's going to be a paid add-on that's coming in spring 22, but you can access it now in any of your dev environments or sandboxes or even production. I think they made it available in beta. But the cool thing about Flow Orchestrator is it's kind of like a combination of flows, but like on steroids, right? Like you can make it so that when a record is created, for example, your custom record gets created, you can have steps in there that are going to forward it to 3 different people to tell them to go to that record and do something, right? And then they can actually mark that step as completed, and then it would go on to like the next steps that have to happen. So it's like this, I don't know the word to use, but it's like process automation at a much higher level than just the standard flow. Now, that being said, process or Flow Orchestrator, I think it's going to be additional cost. I think that kind of sucks, but if we just kind of think through what would be the other ways to do this. Is it the same people that you need to have every time for every one of these records, or is it dependent on the record itself who should do something?
No, it would be the same group of people. They'd either all have like the same, position, role, profile.
What about like a task record? So if you had a flow that would create 3 tasks, one for each of those people that would show up in their task list, and then they can click on that record and mark it off as completed.
No, that could work.
If it's maybe it wasn't the same 3 people, but if it was, people that were a part of, now you mentioned queues and the fact you couldn't do that. But if it was like,
I'm thinking of approval processes that I couldn't do. I could be wrong on the queue one.
Yeah, approval process, that could be another way as well. But what I was thinking is, if you just had 3 different departments that were required to look at that record and kind of sign off on it, you can put, like a screen-based flow on that record. You could send out a notification when that record gets created. They would come to that. They would do whatever review they would do, hit OK, and then that would check a box. So in other words, if 3 departments were required to review that record, you might have 3 different checkboxes indicating that, when each of them is completed. But yeah, I guess it really depends on the use case. And I'm thinking that the task one might be the easiest one, depending what other kind of logic you might have to build into it. But any other thoughts or ideas? I guess just one final question, Chloe. How would you know the 3 people? Is it just like 3 names, or is it you would find the next person?
It would be like a multiple specific users that their role is to do this task every time this record comes in.
Okay. And what do they have to do when they go to that record? Just like review it and say, yes, I reviewed it, or is there something deeper that they have to do?
I did create a Screenflow for what they need to do. So they would like go to this record, click the Screenflow button, and answer a few questions, and then it's done.
Okay. Yeah, because I can see how in that Screenflow you could build in the logic like, who is the person that's looking at this? Is it Jim? And then show this screen to Jim. Is it Bob? Then show this screen to Bob. Like you can actually have that Screenflow kind of go to different paths with, the very specific things that they're required to do on that record. And again, once they're finished and once they have completed it, I would still have some kind of checkbox on the record itself that indicates that their part of it is done. And then that would help you, do all kinds of reporting or, escalations if they haven't, like if it was assigned to them and they didn't finish it within X amount of days, you can, have it send them an email, stuff like that.
Sweet, thank you.
Yeah. And just kind of stepping back a little bit, instead of a checkbox, I probably would go with a date field or a date time field that indicates when they completed it. Because then that can give you some like, enable like reporting on how long it took them, like aging type reports and things like that. That might be pretty useful for you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, cool. I hope that answers your question.
It did. Thanks.
Yeah. All right, Sean, I see you have your hand up.
Bill, we had Emmanuel had his hand up as well before Sean. And then Gia has some info on chainset he would like to share when we get a second.
All right, so let's go with the first one first. Who'd you say that was? That was Emmanuel? Hey, Emmanuel, what do you got?
Hey. Hi, Bill. So I have an interesting situation. I'm not sure if I'm overthinking it or not. I have in this org, I have 3 different queues, and in each queue there's a supervisor and a processor. I'm trying to have a situation. Currently, I have it where only supervisors are able to assign records to the processor. But is there a way to prevent, say, supervisor in a certain queue to assign a record or an application to a processor in a different queue?
Yeah, that's a good one. I want to give you a short answer of yes. No, I guess the more detailed answer might be: are you guys using anything like omni-channel or anything like that, or is this just straight up simple Salesforce?
Yeah, straight up simple Salesforce.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what type of records are these? Are they a custom object? Or are they like a case? Like what is it?
These are applications. So these are yeah.
So like a custom object called application.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. And you mentioned that you have the different queues set up. How would you identify somebody as a supervisor, or I think you mentioned processor? Like, how do you know that they're of that type?
So there's a hierarchy roles that have been created. Hierarchy. So there's a manager and a processor that follow a setting.
Okay. Going back to my comment about when you're holding a hammer, I don't want to try to go back into the flow validation rule thing that we talked about in the beginning, but I started to think that, right? So you want to make sure that when you think about your role hierarchy, you have the supervisor on, let's just call it the East team, right? They should only be able to assign these records to somebody, their processors in the East team.
Only, yes.
And then you have your supervisor in the West, and they should only be able to assign those to folks in the West. I kind of feel like that validation flow that we walked through in the beginning, that might be a good use case here, but let me just open it up. Anybody else have any ideas for how you might accomplish that? I feel like that would be a very similar use case where you can only assign it to folks, where the role prefix or something like that is equal to sales or west or east or whatever it is. But any other thoughts on how you might accomplish that?
I was going to back you up on that one. It's beyond similar with the scenario that you have just built for us. Of course, it may be looking for a queue then rather than only roles, but roles might also be a possible scenario for Emmanuel.
Yeah.
So just to back you up.
Yeah. So Sean, I think I'm sorry. Yeah, I think I'm thinking that might be the way to go. Whether it's based on role, or did you mention that they're in groups as well, Emmanuel?
Yes, they're in a public setting groups, yes, because of the some needed to be in setting groups. So yeah.
Okay.
Better groups, whatever.
Yeah. And again, you have to kind of bear with me today. But I'm thinking that one solution could be what we had discussed, where essentially whether you do it based on the roles or you do it based on the fact that they're part of this, the same group, one way or another, essentially doing that check as part of the flow and then throwing the validation error if they try to do something outside of that. I guess the other thing, and this is where I have absolutely no idea if this is going to work, but let's give it a whirl here. If we go into, let me go in the trailhead real quick. Just wondering if we can, this work here. Okay. All right, let's give this a whirl. What I'm thinking is there a way to put a filter on like an assign to field that would let you only filter it to show people that are part of that role and subordinates? I have no idea if this will work. Let's see.
I missed the earlier part, so I guess the solution, I'm not sure what you guys.
Yeah, no, I'll make sure that we share the recording so that you can see that. But let me just see if this is an option here. So if I go to the account object, and let's just create a new lookup field. So this would be a lookup relationship. We're going to do this as a lookup to the user object. I'm going to hide my Slack channel here. And this would be, okay, so this is going to be like, we'll call this like processor. Something like that. Okay. And then if we can filter, I mean, it would be pretty cool if we can say like only show current user role. There's got to be, is there a way to do this? Like just showing users that are related to that role and subordinates or something? Current user. Yeah, I don't know. Current lookup user, current record account. So they'd only be able to transfer it to people under them in the hierarchy. Yeah, so I don't think this is going to work. I was thinking that if there was some way that through here we would be able to restrict the lookup to like the role and subordinates of that current user's role and subordinates. I think that would be kind of cool, but I don't think that we can do that. So that might be a non-starter. Any other thoughts on how we might accomplish this? So only allow them to assign it to people under them in the role hierarchy. Yeah, I'm thinking, again, this is in that same category of, I have no idea if this would work, but I just wonder if we created, instead of having them transfer it directly through the standard Salesforce UI, if you had a button that was based on a Screenflow that would basically query the correct users or the allowed users, display that to them in a list that they can select from, to do it that way. I wonder if that would work. But I guess the question is, how would you get the users underneath that user in the role hierarchy? How complex is the role hierarchy? Is it multi-levels or is it just like supervisor, processor underneath it?
Just a supervisor processor. Is that?
Yeah, so this might take more time than we have remaining on the call, but where I was kind of going with this is if instead of you going to the account, for example, this one here, or whatever the custom record that you have is, right? Or custom object, instead of, having them change ownership through this mechanism here, or have them selecting the processor through a standard lookup field, we would create a lightning action that would be assigned to processor, right? And when they would click on that, we would have a flow that would essentially grab the current user's role, grab the processor role underneath of it, and then basically query all the users that are in that processor role, and then display that as a screen, or like a pick list on the screen that they would then be able to select from. So almost like giving them a custom UI that figures out who the people are that you want them to be able to select and let them select it that way. I would love to walk through that.
Okay.
But I think, I don't know if we're going to have enough time to kind of finish that.
Okay. I understand.
Yeah. So, and again, there might be a better way to do that. If anybody has any thoughts, let me know. But I might add that as a, maybe a potential one for our next open Q&A. But any other thoughts on a way to accomplish that besides like a screen-based flow to kind of override that assignment, step? Okay. Yeah. So I think I'll see if I can do that one, maybe over the weekend or something, or if not, maybe the next open Q&A, we can tackle that. I think that's a good use case. All right, cool. So any other questions?
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, no worries. And apologies that we couldn't actually build that one out.
Sean is our last one, I think, Bill.
Hey, Sean.
Hey, Bill. This is a bit easier. I'm doing a super badge for business administration specialist. And the task is to give I'll read it. It says this sales data quality specialist supports the entire company and needs to be assigned a role that can see and access all accounts, contacts, and opportunity records for the entire company. So for user profile, I put him as the CEO because he needs access to the entire company. But I'm not getting the verified. Like when I'm it's telling me it's not correct pretty much.
Yeah. So just to make sure we're on the same page, right? So when we talk about making sure they have access to all records, we're not talking about profiles in that case. That would be the role, right? So you want to make sure that they're at the top of the role hierarchy so they can see essentially everything underneath of it. Do you know the specific error message you were getting? Again, I know super badges are a little, we don't want to give all the answers, but what is the specific error that you're getting? And then maybe we can kind of point you in the right direction there. And I'm pulling up that super badge too, just to see.
It says, add the list of users. It's giving me a different. It's giving me a different area. It says, looks like something went wrong. Please try again later. It's giving me a different error now.
Okay. So basically it's giving an error that we have no possibility of figuring out what it is. Okay. What step number was that? Just so I can kind of look at it from my side.
That's step 3. That's step 3.
Okay. Could you be so kind to maybe share your screen real quick?
Sure.
If you can. If not, no worries, but.
Yeah, sure. Give me 1 second. I got to sign out of something. So give me 1 second.
Gotta sign out of all the Katy Perry's greatest hits and all these other embarrassing things you got on there. I got you.
I have two laptops right now. So one is I'm using Trailhead on, and then the other one I'm doing the Zoom call on. But I don't think I'm gonna be able to share my screen.
Okay. Yeah. I think if you were getting a specific error message, that would be helpful.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm trying to think.
Let me share my screen. Let me share my screen. 1 second.
Gotta go through the 15 layers of authentication here now.
Like I'm one of those individuals who have like a whole bunch of tabs open up at the same time. You're like, why do you have all these tabs on?
Yeah. No, I'm right there with you.
Yeah. 3.
Bill, I have to drop. Thank you, sir. I appreciate you.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for your co-hosting abilities.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Appreciate it. All right. So, Sean, if you scroll all the way to the bottom now to where the actual challenge is, and again, we'll try not to give too much away because I don't want to spoil it for other folks that are going through this. But if you actually go to check challenge right now. Okay. Now, the solution for extending access does not have the correct name. Okay. So if you actually look at, so if I pull this up and go to create users section, I'm assuming there's, let's see, chatter feed is full, standard objects, data management, data quality, user management, data quality hero, challenge. Okay. So user, first initial, last name. Okay. All right. So what was it there again? It was saying that the extending access had the wrong name or something like that. Access to the language preference field. Okay. Language.
The solution for the does not have the correct name. So it sounds like it's a name issue. It's not the access.
Okay. So just again, not to give too much away, but there's that section under special project at the top here, right? Where it talks about Maria added a language preference pick list to the account object. For this pilot, provide this one user access to the language preference field without modifying the profile. Name the solution you create bilingual pilot. So can you show me the thing that you created called bilingual pilot?
Oh, I didn't.
Okay. And again, not to give too much away, but what is that thing that you're going to be creating? So you can't change the profile. So how else are you going to be able to assign permissions to a single field for one user?
I'm taking a guess. Is it permission sets?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm thinking that you need to have a permission set in there called bilingual pilot, and then you should be on the right track.
Okay. I took a wild guess. Well, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Good guess. Good guess. All right, cool. Well, like I said, I hope that's helpful. I know there was a few things that we didn't get to fully build out, but I'll do my best to add those to a future agenda. But otherwise, really appreciate everybody's time today. Hope you guys have a great weekend, and we'll catch up next week. Thank you all.
Thank you.